Leo Tolstoy, a Russian writer widely recognized for his masterpieces such as War and Peace and Anna Karenina, experienced one of the most intense and profound existential crises of his time. Born in 1828 into a Russian aristocratic family, Tolstoy inherited vast estates and enjoyed a life filled with material privileges. Despite his fame, wealth, and social status, he found himself confronted with an inner emptiness that, over time, turned into an increasingly overwhelming existential dilemma. The writer, who in his early life indulged in worldly pleasures, began to question the meaning of his own existence, the morality of his actions, and the purpose of human life as a whole. Tolstoy's journey was marked by the duality between his aristocratic heritage and his growing discomfort with the lifestyle he led. Throughout his youth, Tolstoy enjoyed the luxuries of the nobility, hunting, traveling, and engaging in various activities that fed his immediate desires. However, as he delved deeper into philosophical and spiritual matters, this seemingly perfect life began to lose its luster. In his maturity, the author began to experience an increasing dissatisfaction with the superficiality of the world around him. The material pleasures which had once seemed to be the answer to all his needs revealed themselves to be empty and meaningless. He found himself trapped between a world of wealth, status, and entertainment, and a growing desire to seek something deeper, truer, and morally whole. It was at the age of 50 that Tolstoy's existential crisis reached its peak. During this period of his life, he began questioning not only the values of Russian society and his own position within it, but also the foundations of life, death, and human purpose. The author, who had until then written about the complex nature of human relationships, war, and social dilemmas, now found himself in an internal battle against an overwhelming sense of despair and doubt. He began to realize that, despite his great literary output, his material achievements, and the honor society bestowed upon him, none of this seemed to provide a satisfactory answer to the questions that consumed him inside. The search for a deeper meaning in life led him to reflect on death and suffering. Tolstoy began to see that throughout his life, he had lived in a mechanical way, seeking accomplishments and temporary pleasures without a full understanding of what was truly important. The author questioned the pillars of traditional and religious morality, while also seeking answers that could fill the emptiness he felt. He began to rethink his faith and his relationship with God, which led him to a radical reinterpretation of his spirituality. In the following years, Tolstoy distanced himself from the values of the nobility and moved closer to a simpler, more ascetic ideal. His spiritual transformation deepened, leading him to a sincere search for truth and goodness. He abandoned much of his material possessions and adopted a more austere life, focused on simple Christian morality and service to others. The writer even repudiated the Russian Orthodox Church, which he considered a corrupt institution, and began to embrace a more personal form of Christianity, centered on love for others and renunciation of the ego. Tolstoy's existential crisis was not only a philosophical reflection on life and death, but also a profound personal transformation. He felt the need to abandon the conventions of Russian high society, the luxuries of his estate, and the literary world itself in order to focus on a more authentic spiritual path. However, his search for deeper meaning was not free from internal conflicts. Tolstoy himself experienced moments of anguish and doubt, such as when he confronted the idea that his previous literary work might be empty or futile in the face of the magnitude of the spiritual issues he was grappling with. His moral and existential dilemma was reflected not only in his personal life, but also in his worldview, which became marked by a profound crisis of faith and dissatisfaction with society. This moment of crisis in his life is also reflected in his later works, where Tolstoy seeks to portray the human experience in the face of death and suffering. He wrote about the meaning of life, the importance of simplicity, and the need for true, selfless love. His worldview became increasingly focused on morality, honesty, and the pursuit of a pure and more altruistic life. Tolstoy was one of the greatest writers of all time, but his greatness was not limited to literary talent. His existential crisis and search for deeper answers about life, death, and the meaning of existence revealed a man in constant evolution, someone who was not content with easy answers and sought the truth in a world marked by uncertainties. Although his life was marked by great contradictions and dilemmas, he left a literary and philosophical legacy that continues to inspire readers and thinkers to this day. Lev Tolstoy's existential crisis, therefore, was a personal and spiritual journey, a confrontation with the limits of human existence, and an unrelenting search for meaning in a seemingly purposeless world. In facing the emptiness that consumed him, Tolstoy left us, through his writing and his own transformed life, a profound reflection on the universal questions of life, death, and human destiny. Tolstoy's search for answers to the meaning of life led him to delve into various philosophical currents and systems of thought that, rather than alleviating his anguish, ended up intensifying his existential crisis. He began to explore the ideas of both ancient and modern thinkers, hoping to find answers to the questions that tormented him, but the reality was very different. The philosophy of Socrates, for example, with its emphasis on the pursuit of truth through reason and virtue, seemed, at first, to offer a path to understanding existence. However, Tolstoy soon realized that Socratic philosophy, with its focus on pure reason and self-knowledge, did not provide comfort for his deeper existential doubts. Socrates, although a great advocate of ethics and morality, did not address the ultimate questions of life, death, or human suffering in a way that could satisfy the writer's inner quest. Tolstoy also turned to Buddhist thought, drawn to the idea of overcoming suffering through the renunciation of desire and the cultivation of inner peace. However, upon encountering Buddha's teachings, which proposed complete detachment from worldly pleasures and the pursuit of enlightenment, Tolstoy felt even more disconnected. The path to nirvana seemed like a process of denying life itself, something that, although deeply philosophical, did not meet the writer's need to find a vital purpose. The distancing from existential questions, instead of providing relief, made Tolstoy feel that this philosophy was more concerned with erasing suffering than explaining the meaning of existence, leaving him in an even greater state of emptiness. Schopenhauer, with his pessimistic view and his philosophy centered on the idea that suffering is a fundamental condition of human existence, was also a thinker whose ideas Tolstoy sought to explore. Schopenhauer's view of suffering as intrinsic to life and the desire to extinguish the will as a way to achieve peace did not provide the Russian writer with the understanding he longed for. On the contrary, Schopenhauer's pessimism only deepened Tolstoy's despair, who was already in a state of growing anguish and disillusionment. The idea that suffering was inevitable and life essentially painful seemed more like a confirmation of his own internal experience of despair than a satisfactory explanation. Tolstoy also turned to contemporary scientific theories, especially Darwinism, which provided a rational and materialistic explanation for the origin of species and the development of life. However, he soon realized that science, as impressive as it was in explaining the how of existence, did not offer any answers to the why. The theory of evolution, with its emphasis on the struggle for survival and the adaptation of species, seemed to reveal the laws of nature, but did not provide any meaning or purpose to human life. Tolstoy felt that science was incapable of addressing the existential questions that tormented him, as it did not concern itself with morality, human suffering, or the ultimate fate of the soul amidst the sea of uncertainties and frustrations. Tolstoy began to realize that there were four possible ways of dealing with existential anguish. The first of these responses was simply to ignore the problem and live superficially, avoiding the deep questions of life. While many seemed to live this way, Tolstoy soon realized that this approach was illusory and unsustainable. Ignoring existential emptiness did not bring peace, but only prolonged a silent anguish, a discomfort that grew as he delved deeper into the emptiness of everyday life. The pursuit of material pleasure as a way to escape existential pain was the second alternative Tolstoy considered. Although wealth, status, and physical pleasures had initially been sources of comfort, he came to realize that these things did not provide lasting meaning. Material pleasure, as intense as it might be, was fleeting and incapable of filling the deeper emptiness he felt in his soul. The third option Tolstoy pondered was renouncing life itself. Faced with suffering and a lack of meaning, the idea of abandoning existence seemed like a plausible solution. However, he soon rejected this possibility because the idea of giving up life contradicted his intuition that there was something more, something that justified his existence. The thought of withdrawing from the world and escaping from existential responsibility seemed like a form of escape rather than a true solution to the dilemma. This led him to consider the fourth possibility: living in a state of limbo, without definitive answers, but also without giving up the search. This approach, although complex and difficult, was the one Tolstoy began to adopt. He allowed himself to live with uncertainty, accepting that the search for answers could be an ongoing and evolving process where the very journey of reflection and transformation could become a means of understanding. This acceptance of uncertainty was not a capitulation to hopelessness, but a way of finding meaning in the very search for meaning. Although Tolstoy never found a definitive answer to the questions that tormented him, his experience of existential crisis and his search for answers profoundly shaped his worldview and his commitment to a morally upright life. By moving away from easy explanations, Tolstoy came to the conclusion that the meaning of life could not simply be found in ready-made answers, whether in philosophy, science, or social conventions. He came to believe that the true meaning of existence lay in a continuous search for truth, in the deep questioning of one's own beliefs, and in practicing a simple and moral life. The existential crisis that tormented Lev Tolstoy found an unexpected answer when he began observing the lives of Russian peasants whose living conditions were humble, yet they seemed to carry a serene faith, something that Tolstoy had not been able to fully comprehend until then. The peasants, despite the harsh daily struggles and the suffering imposed by poverty, had a form of spirituality that allowed them to endure adversity with a calmness that contrasted sharply with Tolstoy's internal turmoil. What impressed him most was how, without the material luxuries and without the complex philosophical knowledge he had explored, these peasants seemed to find a peace of mind that he had never achieved, even after a long journey of reflection and searching for answers. This simple and genuine faith, which was not based on the rational understanding of life's great questions, but on the acceptance of a higher purpose, stirred something deep within Tolstoy. By observing this religious life, grounded in simple beliefs and everyday spiritual practices, he began to realize that the true answer to his existential doubts was not found in complicated philosophical theories or scientific explanations, but in something more direct and human: genuine faith and love for others. For him, the life of the peasants represented a form of wisdom that transcended intellectual logic, a wisdom based on the acceptance of suffering as part of the human condition and trust in a greater meaning to life, something he had not found in the ideas of Socrates, Buddha, or Schopenhauer. Tolstoy's transformation was not only intellectual, but also practical. He began to reconsider faith not as an escape from life's difficulties, but as a legitimate and profound way to find purpose and meaning even in the face of suffering and death. For him, faith was not an attempt to escape suffering, but a way to confront it differently, recognizing it as part of the human condition, but also as a means of drawing closer to something divine and greater. Tolstoy, confronted with the simple faith of the peasants, was moved by an understanding that life should be lived with humility, love, and dedication to the well-being of others. With this new perspective, Tolstoy made a radical decision to abandon the luxuries and privileges of his previous life. He no longer felt comfortable with material possessions, the honors of the nobility, or the relentless pursuit of status and recognition. What once seemed essential for happiness and personal fulfillment was now just an obstacle to the true meaning of life. He gave up much of his property, distancing himself from the comforts of his aristocratic life, and began dedicating himself to caring for others, especially the peasants he now saw with new eyes. Tolstoy felt that true fulfillment came from simplicity, compassion, and dedication to others. His new spiritual vision was not based on rigid dogmas or the norms of the Russian Orthodox Church, but on a personal quest for a pure form of Christianity, stripped of the rituals and institutions he considered corrupt. He distanced himself from the Church, convinced that the true essence of Christianity lay in the practice of love for others, renunciation of the ego, and commitment to a life of moral integrity. The faith he found was not a passive belief, but an active practice of love and service, in which helping others became a way to find the meaning of life. From that moment on, Tolstoy experienced an inner peace that had been completely foreign to him until then. He recognized that material success, reason, and possessions had never been able to provide him with the peace of mind he so longed for. From the moment he began focusing on a simple life and the needs of others, Tolstoy found a deeper purpose for his existence. He embraced everyday life with its challenges, limitations, and moments of suffering, but now with a clear understanding that this suffering did not need to be feared or avoided, but was part of a larger journey. Tolstoy's transformation was, thus, a spiritual journey based on accepting life as it was, with its difficulties and uncertainties, but seeking a greater meaning for it. He came to see that the purpose of life was not to achieve individual happiness or personal fulfillment, but to live altruistically, committed to the well-being of others and the constant search for a transcendent meaning beyond rational understanding. This new spirituality that Tolstoy found was one focused on love and compassion, which led him to understand that true peace does not come from the relentless pursuit of definitive answers, but from surrendering to the present moment, to others, and to the process of life itself. Tolstoy became, then, an example of spiritual transformation, a man who, after years of anguish and searching, found in simple living and love for others the answer to his existential crisis. His journey showed that instead of seeking external and complex solutions, true wisdom often resides in the humblest practices and in the understanding that life, with all its difficulties, can be full and meaningful when lived with faith and compassion. He did not find peace by solving the great philosophical or scientific dilemmas of life, but by surrendering himself for the sake of others. And it was in this act of renunciation and service that Tolstoy found the serenity he was seeking.